She was a wife, she was a mom, she was a TV star, and she was murdered by a woman that her family says presented herself as a licensed medical professional. But the woman who called herself the, quote, butt lady is now a convicted murderer for what she did. And the shocking part of what is already a shocking story is that this isn't the first time that she had one of her patients die on her watch. We're on the case, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Chris Stewart. The family of the victim in this story say their loved one's death was preventable and more could have been done to stop a woman named Libby Adame. Now I want to show you Libby Adame's mugshot. Here it is. On the West Coast, she went by a nickname that was certainly memorable, and it's the nickname, quote, the butt lady. She was called that because of a procedure that she was supposedly marketing herself as an expert in. And it's a procedure the FDA doesn't approve of. A procedure where someone injects silicone into someone's rear end to increase its size and its shape, a butt augmentation procedure. The FDA actually put out a warning about that procedure in 2017, saying that people really need to be careful if they're going to get it done, and they really should make sure whoever's doing the procedure is licensed to do it. Those concerns came with real-life consequences on March 24th at the home of 58-year-old actress Cindiana Santangelo. Now, she had a pretty lengthy and very, very successful career in television in Hollywood. She was on shows like ER and CSI Miami. But it was on that day, March 24th of this year, that the butt lady came to her home to give her injections of silicone. And after receiving those injections in her behind, there were complications with the procedure. And this mom of two was rushed to the hospital, and that's where she died. Her cause of death was a fatal embolism as a result of those silicone injections. Libby Adame, the butt lady, was arrested, and she was charged with second-degree murder. Prosecutors argued that she knew the dangers of doing this procedure and that she wasn't properly licensed to perform it. Shockingly, this wasn't the first time that Libby Adame was convicted related to the death of someone she was doing this procedure to. I want you to see this video here. This is per KABC, and it's just from last year, 2024, when Libby Adame and her daughter, 25-year-old Elisa Galaz, were convicted of involuntary manslaughter and of practicing medicine without a certificate. Now, that case was related to what happened in September 2019, when this woman, 26-year-old Carissa Rajpal, received 3 butt augmentation procedures within just a month. She was injected with silicone illegally by Galaz and her mom. The butt lady and her daughter, they were sentenced to prison time last year after being convicted of that manslaughter charge. Adame received 4 years and 4 months for the crimes, and Galaz, the daughter, was sentenced to 3 years and 8 months. Why aren't they in prison already related to that manslaughter case? A judge decided last year that the two should be released based on time served. They had been in custody awaiting trial since 2021. Now, even though she was responsible for the death of a client, Adame wasn't done performing the procedure, and that led her to the Malibu home of Cindiana Santangelo less than a year after she was convicted of manslaughter. Now, before I talk about the argument that her attorney made on her behalf, I want to bring up that per the LA Times, in that 2024 trial, prosecutors said that they have video of Libby Adame fleeing a Los Angeles salon in 2018 as paramedics arrived to treat a woman who died from injections, but charges were never filed in that case. So prosecutors in that case alleged that Adame could be responsible for now a total of 3 people dying because of this procedure that she wasn't licensed to perform. In the case involving Cindiana Santangelo, Adame's trial just ended with this verdict per KABC.
We, the jury, in the above entitled action, find defendant Libby Adame guilty of the crime of second-degree murder upon Cindiana Santangelo.
Jurors convicted Adame of second-degree murder. They also convicted her of practicing medicine without certification, which is what she was convicted of last year in 2024, along with the charge of manslaughter. According to the LA Times, prosecutors pointed to communication they have between Adame and Santangelo leading up to the appointment as proof that Adame was the one who did the procedure and was responsible for Santangelo's death. But Adame's defense claims otherwise. They argue that Adame was not responsible for what happened. They say she didn't actually do the procedure. It must have been someone else. They claim that Adame was only working as a consultant for doctors who are licensed to perform that procedure, but only in Mexico. They say they will appeal this verdict. Adame is set to be sentenced on November 2nd. It's important to note that second-degree murder carries a mandatory minimum sentence of 15 years in prison in California. Before we get back to this episode of On the Case, one of the most watched shows on all of YouTube, I want to take a moment and talk about our partner and sponsor, Morgan & Morgan, America's largest injury law firm. They have more than 1,000 attorneys and they win a lot. They've recovered over $25 billion from more than 500,000 clients. In the past few months, a client in Florida received $12 million after the insurance company offered just $350,000. In Pennsylvania, a client was awarded $26 million. That is 40 times the insurer's $650,000 offer. Another client in Pennsylvania received $29 million after being offered only $500,000. Even if you don't think your case is worth millions of dollars, why not fight for what you deserve? Morgan & Morgan makes it so easy to start a claim. You can do it with just 8 clicks on your phone. So if you've been injured and you need to start a claim, go to www.forthepeople.com/OTC. You can also scan this QR code on the screen or click the link below. Joining us now to talk more about this case is the president of West Coast Trial Lawyers and former federal prosecutor Nima Rahmani. It's always great to have you on Law and Crime. This case from your neck of the woods in Los Angeles. I want to start first with the defense, where she argued that she wasn't the one who actually did the procedure. What do you make of that strategy from her defense attorneys?
Chris, it's a defense, but not a good one. And there really weren't many defenses to be had here. In the first case, of course, and I'm sure we're going to talk about it, the defense was, look, I didn't mean to do it, right? And that's how you got murder to manslaughter. But when you're charged a second time around for a second death, that I didn't mean to do it defense is not going to fly. So you got to pivot and you got to say, it wasn't me. Now, the argument that the defense put forth is that, she showed up afterwards, someone else had injected her, she was there for a consulting reason. Didn't make a whole lot of sense, especially when there were text messages coordinating the silicone injection. So I'm not surprised the jurors saw through it and she was convicted.
And it's interesting because in the first conviction, which was just last year, I mean, that's kind of what makes this story so shocking, is that it was just last year she was convicted of manslaughter, but this time she's convicted of murder. Why is it, for what seems to be very similar, doing these augmentation procedures, but this time her client dies once again and she's convicted of murder? Why?
So this time she was convicted of murder under a sort of deliberate indifference or depraved heart theory. So obviously you can be charged with murder if you intend to kill someone, you actually kill someone. But you can also be charged with murder if you have a depraved heart. And the classic law school example is, you shoot into an abandoned building, right? Or what you think is an abandoned building. You don't know if someone's in there, if someone's going to get shot and die. You really show a deliberate indifference to human life. And in this particular case, because she'd already been convicted once of killing a patient, she's playing Russian roulette with people's lives. And that's how you get past that involuntary manslaughter, which of course is criminal negligence, recklessness, all the way up to murder, which has a significant difference in the potential sentence.
And we'll get into sentencing in just a moment. In the manslaughter case, that was related to the death of a patient in 2019, and it took until 2024 for her to be convicted in that case. In this case, the murder case, her patient dies in March of this year, and then she's convicted here in October. What do you make about the difference in the timeline and just how quickly this case moved?
I think prosecutors took the case much more seriously, especially because, let's be honest, Chris, this was an embarrassment to our criminal justice system. For someone to kill someone, be charged with murder, be convicted of manslaughter, get more than 4 years in state prison, and then be released a short time thereafter on electronic monitoring where she kills someone else. So, I'm not saying decisions are made for political reasons, but it was certainly a black eye for everyone that was involved in this previous case. And I want to make sure that this is someone who is dangerous, that needs to be taken off the streets, so she doesn't kill again. Kind of an example I like to give is the Matthew Perry case, right? You had the ketamine queen who killed someone before because she supplied them ketamine. And then, she does it again and she kills Matthew Perry. And obviously Matthew Perry is a celebrity, and the political and practical reality is those cases are treated differently. But when you have someone who's killed now 2 people, there is an increased sense of urgency to move those cases forward.
It's interesting because in every case she's had, it's been related to these like butt augmentation injections that she's doing, where it's, if she had a gun and she shot someone, it might have been an accidental or a manslaughter case. I don't know if she's getting time served in that case, but because it was this medical procedure that she wasn't licensed to do, she ends up getting out and then gets right back into the business of doing it. What goes into a judge's decision when someone, manslaughter is no slap on the wrist kind of charge, but ends up giving a time served to an extent, and then she's out on the street right thereafter?
It's tough to get inside the judge's head. Now, the judge did warn her that if she does it again, she's going to be prosecuted for murder. So he literally told her. Now, obviously, she didn't get the message, and she was out there, injecting people. Some of it's the judge, some of it's the DA, and some of it's just, frankly, the Department of Corrections and the fact that California state and state prisons, California county jails, they're over capacity, especially when it comes to female inmates. There's stories where some of them serve 10% of their sentence, 20%. You would never have this in the federal system. So I wish I had an answer. It's more of a public policy problem, a jail overcrowding problem, but absolutely. If you kill another human being by doing a procedure that is not FDA approved, you're not licensed to do, you have no really medical license whatsoever. And I think the argument was, well, they do it in Mexico. Well, obviously this isn't Mexico, and a lot of people die from medical tourism in Mexico. So, there's no real legal defense here, and to get a slap on the wrist, electronic monitoring, be out in the streets when you've taken the life of another human being, even assuming the first time was accidental, that doesn't seem a just result to me under any stretch. Because like you said, if you're driving under the influence and you kill someone, you're probably going to get several years in state prison because you took someone's life. So I don't really know what happened here. It wasn't the just result, but now we know she's going to get 15 to life in this new case.
When you have a case like this, and a judge is a political position in a lot of ways, so are district attorneys, but where's the accountability after something like this happens? Because I think of the family of this woman who dies. She was a mom of 2, and you find out not only probably the shock of losing your loved one, but it's, oh, by the way, this was a woman who was let out, very, given the slap on the wrist for it. What happens to a judge or anyone who is involved in that decision after the fact?
Chris, not a whole lot. Really, the only fate that they may suffer is to be voted out of office. Obviously, the DA has to run every 4 years, and I'm not saying this was Nathan Hochman's fault, by any stretch. And judges, they can face a challenger here in California. So they can be recalled or they can face a challenger. And if they are soft, they may face the challenger from the district attorney's office to say, hey, this judge is responsible for someone losing their life. Now, they can't be sued civilly. They have very broad immunity, both on the prosecution and the judge side. So there's not going to be any money that goes into the victim's pocket. But of course, these folks could lose their jobs.
And I know both cases, she was convicted of a charge that was along the lines of performing a medical procedure with not being certified to do it. What's the punishment just for that particular charge, considering both times? She was already convicted once of doing the procedure and not being certified for it, and then here it is again. It clearly didn't stop her the first time around.
Yeah, you have that charge. You have the enhancement for bodily injury. That's I think a 3-year enhancement. Ultimately, we're really going to be talking about that top count, that second-degree murder, right? It's 15 to life. Everything else is just, not to say it's not important. They're lesser crimes. It's important because they bring in evidence into the case, right, about her being licensed or not. That might not have necessarily come in. Could have, but it certainly does come in when it's an element of the charge. But really, you're looking at that top count, that 15 years, and she might get more than that. 15 years is the minimum for second-degree murder. I wouldn't be surprised if she gets something closer to 20, given the fact that she did this again so close in time to her being released.
Yeah, what will go into that decision? Because again, if it was a case where, she was driving drunk and she had a previous manslaughter conviction on drunk driving, I could see that being a really strong sentence in a lot of states. This one, again, it's still kind of this, I mean, I don't know if it is, but it's a medical procedure that she was performing. I mean, how many years could she get, considering the judge warned her last time that if she does it again, that there would be really serious consequences?
Yeah, I mean it's guesswork. We saw what happened last time. I think this is probably somewhere near a 20-year type case. First degree murder, you really start getting to the 25 to life. I'm not saying we're quite there in terms of this being an intentional act in terms of killing this woman, but I think 20 years sounds right to me, given the fact that now you've killed a second person so close in time to the previous death. You really got out and started doing this knowing how dangerous it is. So that 15, the bare minimum seems low, especially given that there are those enhancements that we're talking about. 20 seems about right if I had to guess what the sentence would be in a case like this.
Yeah, and you think she's a little bit older, think she's in her 50s, so you'd be talking about someone, if they did the full length of that sentence, that they would be, in their elder years by the time they get out. I know we were talking before about people getting out, and certainly she was able to be released early the first time. If she's sentenced to 20 years, knowing like what we were saying about female inmates in California and how often they're released, I mean, what would go into determining how long she would actually spend of that sentence in jail, prison?
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's the possibility of parole at some point, right? We're seeing that with the Menendez brothers here. Usually, you got to serve about half your time to even be eligible for something like that. So at least 10 years inside. Again, I'm not saying that's enough, but as far as the earliest she can probably get out when you're dealing with a murder conviction, and we know it's hard to get parole that first time. So, double-digit years, hopefully serving in the Department of Corrections state prison here in California. Hopefully this is a lesson to her and anyone who's going to perform these procedures or even receive these procedures. Look, I live and work in LA. I see these Brazilian butt lifts everywhere. Maybe they're not that common in other parts of the country, but look, if you're going to get it done, go to a professional that knows what they're doing, to save a few $1,000s. And I get it, not everyone has money to afford these really expensive procedures, but you're really rolling the dice and your life may be at risk.
That was going to be one question, just working in Los Angeles. And hey, plastic surgery, kind of the cosmetic industry is huge in LA and Southern California. How often do you see cases where people may not be happy with what is, I mean, clearly in this case, someone loses their life, and I'm not making light of that, but the idea of you actually having a case against somebody if you just didn't like how a procedure worked out?
Yeah, I've seen all sorts of botched plastic procedures here in LA. And, those individuals may sue for medical malpractice. It's pretty rare for someone to actually die. But look, it does happen, right? A famous case, I think, Kanye West's mom, I think, died,
Yeah.
if I believe, because of a plastic surgery procedure. So still a procedure, and again, I'm not saying that an injection is the same, but oftentimes you do go under full anesthesia. It's surgery, right? So you're really putting yourself at risk. And obviously, look, I get it. I live in the world of, modeling and social media, and I understand why people do this. But if you're going to do it, go to the right person. Don't get it done in your home by someone who doesn't have a medical license.
What's the line? And clearly in this case, she was not, did not have the certification to be performing this procedure, but where is the line between it being a civil case, something like a medical malpractice case, compared to what we have here, which was a manslaughter and a murder?
It's the difference between that simple negligence and recklessness. And the example I like to give is, if you're driving and, sun gets in your eyes, or you glance at your phone and you hit someone, that's going to be certainly a civil lawsuit, right? You're going to be sued for wrongful death. It won't necessarily be a manslaughter prosecution where you're going to go to jail. But obviously, if you're under the influence of drugs or alcohol, you're driving more than 100 miles an hour in a 35 zone, if you're really reckless, well, that's when you cross the line from simple negligence, a civil lawsuit, criminal negligence, which is going to be a manslaughter prosecution. So in this particular case, again, not FDA approved, not licensed, all those things really crosses the line from just your normal medical malpractice case to a criminal prosecution.
And I'm just getting into hypotheticals here, but even if she's not licensed, if there was some sort of waiver she signed before the procedure, would that have any sort of legal weight whatsoever? Even, considering she wasn't licensed to do the procedure, you sign a waiver saying, hey, everything's going to be okay. Would that have had any impact on this case?
Not necessarily, Chris. Obviously, we're practicing lawyers, right? Someone who's not licensed can't represent someone, even if they waive the right to have a licensed attorney. You got to be licensed to do the procedure, to handle the case. That's something that is, an administrative rule as well as a criminal one in every state, and it's not something that can be waived by the client or the patient.
And then just lastly, would the family have any sort of, who could they go after civilly? If she's just an individual who is doing this, is there anywhere else that they could look if they had a lawyer to try and get some sort of compensation?
Obviously, they could sue her civilly, but I don't think Adame has a whole lot of assets, especially if she's going to be in prison. If she was working for someone in the course and scope of employment, they could sue Adame's employer. But again, I don't get the sense that she was working for someone who did have a license. So unfortunately, sometimes in these cases, if the wrongdoer has no assets, there's no insurance coverage, you can go get a judgment, tens of millions of dollars, but you got to go collect that judgment. So I don't know if there's going to be any financial outcome that is going to help the victim's family here. Unfortunately, we may just be talking about criminal justice here.
No, and we'll see how it plays out when it comes to sentencing. Nima Rahmani, it's always great to have you on Law and Crime. Thanks for talking about this one with us.
Of course, Chris. Talk to you soon.
That will do it for On the Case, presented by Law and Crime. Subscribe to us on YouTube and Spotify. I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.